Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. When the conversation turns to real estate, it's not long before the topic of stamp duty normally comes up. You won't find too many fans of it. It's one of those inefficient taxes that stifles economic growth, costing 70 cents out of every dollar raised. That's why the New South Wales Government has proposed to abolish stamp duty on real estate and replace it with a property tax that could either be paid as a lump sum if you're planning on staying in a house for a long time, or as a smaller annual fee if it's likely you'll move again. It's a move that's been well received almost universally, which makes the decision by the Victorian Government even harder to comprehend. They're going the other way, increasing stamp duty from 5.5% to 6.5% on homes worth more than $2 million. One of our favourite economists, Dr. Shane Oliver from AMP Capital, says it'll affect the whole property market, squeezing people out of higher-end properties and pushing them further down the line. Leah Calnan is the president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. Leah, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you for having me.
So, what do you think about this budget measure that's supposed to come out in today's Victorian budget?
Yeah, look, it's actually not too surprising. We know how reliant the Victorian Government is on both stamp duty and land tax, and it's very disappointing. There wasn't a lot of there was actually no consultation, I should say. It was really us waking up on Saturday morning to find it in the papers.
Okay. So with stamp duties, they're inefficient taxes. We've discussed that. Why is it the taxpayer gets so little from the stamp duty that's paid?
Well, really, it's a tax for purchasing a property, which, as you mentioned earlier on, it can create an environment where people will be discouraged from purchasing property. And, that takes away the whole concept of the Australian dream. So it's really important that it's a balanced approach. And for so long, land tax and stamp duty has been a conversation that not only the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, but all other property sectors have continued to rally government on. Unfortunately, when we weigh up all of the contributions that the sectors collectively contribute, it sits just under 50%. So whilst I would love to see it go, and it's a conversation we have, I feel like it's almost a daily conversation. It's something that they're always going to be heavily reliant on, irrespective of who's in government.
There are also proposals to do more than just stamp duty. It's also increased land tax and then there's a new tax on property investment.
Yeah, and land tax, I think a lot of investors, now that the land tax calculations worked on the start of each year, and because we saw 2019, 2020 kind of move back a little bit, there was an expectation from investors in the market that they would see a reduction in their land tax bills, knowing full well that with the strength of the current sales market that we would see those prices or that land tax contribution increase in the 21 land tax bills. But it just continues to rise. And realistically, what it is it's sitting at 19%. It's a lot of money for, again, holding property. And it really, I think it really highlights the challenges that investors have. And often there's been a lot of talk about the thresholds, and the $2 million threshold has been thrown around a lot. And we know that's the limit that the government's looking at the moment as part of the budget. But what we have to remember is that there's 155 suburbs in Melbourne that are already $1 million suburbs. We're sitting at a state where our median house price is in excess of $1 million. So it's only going to trend upwards. And the question that we kind of have at the moment is if the Andrews government gets stuck in 12 months' time, will they reduce that threshold from that 2 million to say 1.8? And then all of a sudden there's more of the Victorian market that is having to contribute that higher contribution.
So you mentioned before the property taxes broadly contribute a huge part of the overall budget. What do you think of the idea in New South Wales where they're talking about introducing a land tax, which is an annual land tax, which is far smaller than the stamp duty a purchaser would pay up front, and you wouldn't actually pay, well, actually, I think you have an option to pay up front or pay it on an annual basis. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, New South Wales have been working on that broad-based land tax concept for a while, and it is something that we have spoken with the Treasurer about. The challenge I think you've got, though, is that there has been a lot of stamp duty taxes that have been paid by Victorians for a long time. So you've got to get that calculation right. You have to think about the self-funded retirees. You also need to think about those ones going into retirement and looking at their own family home, and then the affordability aspect for the first home buyers. So whilst it sounds fairly simple when we generally say it's a broad-based tax that everyone pays irrespective of, what you own, I think you've got to go back and really look at what the calculations are going to be considered in order to see whether or not it's going to be, fair and equitable. And that's really what I think every Victorian is after.
But I'm just going back to the New South Wales point. They're giving the option of paying a lump sum up front or effectively annuitising it over a number of years. Wouldn't that be fairer than the other states, which are just talking about basically a lump sum stamp duty?
Yeah, and again, depending on the individual circumstances, as long as the goalpost didn't move. And I think that's the risk that you would potentially have is if it is paid in 10 years' time. We know people tend to transact property every 7 to 10 years. So, as long as it was really clear at the time of purchase, this is what the anticipated calculation was going to be, I think people would go in there with a much more comfortable position rather than, getting to the end of that property, the journey with that particular property and then going, oh my goodness, how am I now going to afford this?
Stay with me, Leah. We'll be back in a minute. I'm talking to Leah Calnan, President of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. So what are your members saying about the Victorian and the New South Wales options?
Oh, look, I don't think any real estate agent, member or the public likes any of the taxes. We know it's a part of life, but it does seem to be that, that's the go-to for particularly the Andrews government when there's a need for additional funding. And in fact, when we go back to when they first came in power, they've actually implemented or increased about 19 different taxes relating to our sector. So, the pattern is certainly there that when funds are needed or when there is this perception, and I think it's very easy to assume that there's a perception that people that own real estate are fat cats, and they're absolutely not. They are your average mum and dads who own one investment property, have a family, are trying to get ahead, or they're self-funded retirees. So it does create some challenges.
I suppose when you've got an $8 trillion sector, those numbers came out recently, and superannuation's only $3 trillion, it's very difficult for governments not to try and take a bite of that.
Yeah, absolutely. They're always going to try and take a bite. And I think we accept that, but it's the continual bites that they take. If we think about it's an apple, I'm sure we're down to the core really on how much more have they got to take. It still needs to be a functioning sector and attractive. We don't want... I think also, when we think about the Victorian property market, and I'm extremely pleased and proud on how well the agents manoeuvred through to COVID and also how strong the Victorian property sector has bounced back. But what I think the public don't always realise is that is the houses and the units market. That's not the apartment market. That's not the rental market. That's not the commercial rental market either. So whilst there is a lot of strong activity in the sales market, you have investors in the CBD or apartments in the CBD where you've got vacancy for 6-8 months. They've had no income in. And again, when we think about what, I know the Treasurer made the comment on the weekend I was watching that there's been lots of, stimulus provided to the property sector. Well, that's incorrect. What has been provided is financial support to the residential rental market, to the tenants or the renters, not to the landlords. So it still creates lots of challenges.
So do we need to open up the borders and get foreign students back? Is that the way to fix?
Oh, yeah. It's got to be a start. They need to look at something. When you've got a vacancy rate in the Melbourne CBD at 7.7%, and, I've been doing this for nearly 30 years and I've never seen a vacancy rate across any part of Australia sitting at that. So they're going to need to do something in order to stimulate those properties and also to get life back into the CBD. But again, we often just get caught up in the CBD. It's not just the CBD. It's Collingwood, it's Richmond, it's Carlton, it's Brunswick. It's all of those areas where there's a high traffic flow of students and often international travellers.
So what's the returns like on, for an investor in an apartment at the moment?
Oh, negative. It's really hard. At the moment in the rental market, anything within 0 to 10 kilometres, when a tenant gives their notice to vacate, the poor property managers are having a conversation that says something along the lines of, hi owner, your tenant's now given their notice, You're going to need to spend, X amount of money, potentially in excess of $500 to upgrade your marketing. You're going to need to make changes. And I know previously for the last 5 years you've been receiving $500 a week, but you're probably going to go down to about $350 a week. And that's if you can secure a tenant. I've got clients myself who have had vacancy for 8 months, and it's hard, very difficult for them.
What about commercial real estate? Where's that sitting?
Commercial real estate is in a world of pain. We've got many tenants that are still in occupation of properties and don't have the means to pay the rent. And you feel for them because, they've started their businesses, but they don't have the ability to be able to pay. And they've been given lifelines from the government to be able to provide them with some support. But that doesn't create enough income for the owner of that property to be able to, maintain the necessary cash flow in order to, cover their bills. You also have all of those properties that are sitting vacant. And I know we see it fluctuates. When you drive down Chapel Street or Church Street or in the CBD, it's not uncommon to see for lease signs in the windows. But when you're seeing it at every second and every third shop, that's when you can clearly see that commercial market is in trouble, and there needs to be some additional stimulus there.
We'll be back with more in a minute. My guest today is President of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, Leah Calnan. Okay, so where does this all land, do you think, in the next couple of years?
Oh, it's a great question. I think, once we see those borders reopen and international students return, the market will return. And I'm saying that to not only our members, but to investors. This is short-term pain. And I know short-term for most people might be a few months. Short-term is probably going to be 12 to 18 months before we really see something positive in those particular areas. They're going to need to reinvent the way that they do commercial transactions, whether or not everything, you have that balance of feel that you can go into a shop frontage and experience the transaction of buying something, but also running a dual business on the online platform. That's probably what we're going to see moving forward. I was thinking about it the other day. For me, and I live near Chadstone, I haven't physically been in Chadstone for 6-8 months. Everything I buy is online because I don't have the time to go in, but I also just don't want to deal with it going into that environment.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. Leah, thanks for talking to Fear and Greed.
My pleasure.
That was Leah Calnan, President of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join me every morning for the full Fear and Greed podcast with all the business news you need to know. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.